Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be around the city and across the state, coming to you live from the heart of Chicago. It's e-learning with Mr. Moeller. So today we're going to introduce the Advanced Placement U.S. Government and Politics class for 2020-2021. So we'll start out just by talking about what are you going to have to do in order to try to get that college credit. So the Advanced Placement test is going to have two key components to it. The first being a multiple choice section that requires you to know a certain amount of vocabulary as well as concepts, as well as 4 essays, 4 free response questions, each kind of aimed at a different skill in terms of political science. And so what we're looking at with this is going to be kind of a two-sided test. So if you're wondering like what vocab will I need to know, what court cases will I need to be familiar with, I have a sheet for you. If you go to OneNote, AP Reference, AP Terms, you will see all of the terms that AP has required that all students know in order to be prepared for the test. So go ahead and check that out, and we'll be going over those terms at various times throughout the year. So in terms of what you'll be asked to do in the advanced placement test, there's kind of 4 big things you might be asked to do. The first is concept application. And so what that means is maybe we're talking about something like checks and balances. Well, it would ask you to actually take a scenario and apply the idea of checks and balances and explain how this concept actually applies to a real world example. The second has to do with data literacy. So we worked on that a lot last year, and that's going to be on the AP test too. To analyze data, whether it be a table or a graph or a chart of some kind, and to really draw a conclusion based upon that type of data representation. So we'll also be practicing that. Last 2, a Supreme Court comparison. You are going to have to look at a past Supreme Court case that said something major about the Constitution and compare it or apply it to another case, usually a modern case, usually one that's either very recent or hasn't been decided yet. Then the last thing, argument essay. You're going to have to actually take a political position on some type of issue and defend it using evidence, not just, well, I think this. And so these are the skills that are on the AP test. And if you guys remember a little bit from last year, these are actually very, very close to our US history learning goals. And so hopefully we'll be off and running. So let's talk a little bit about American government, just kind of get you introduced a little bit to what we're talking about. And so when we talk about politics and government, what we're really talking about is a way of making decisions. So a lot of groups, a lot of organizations, even nations will fail because there is not a good system in place for them to make collective decisions. Think about, just even 10 friends trying to decide where to go to lunch. It can be really complicated. And so politics and government is kind of the structures that we use to make collective decisions about how power should be used. And so when we talk about power, it's a very, very simple idea. Power is the ability to make somebody do something. I have power over you that I can, give you a detention if you don't do homework. You might have power over a younger sibling, and certainly the government has power over us. They get to tell us what we can and can't do. And so the really big question when we talk about politics and government is who gets power, who gets to decide how that power is used. And so that's a lot of what this class is going to look like. What power should the government get, and how should those powers be used? So in terms of just some quick definitions so we can just get the year started, government is a system for making decisions. Power, ability to make somebody do something, and you should remember from last year that authority is power that the population, the group, sees as legitimate. You guys, to a certain extent, give me authority when you do my homework. You accept that I should be the teacher, and so you do what I say. The way that power is exercised is usually through rules and laws. You guys are well aware of these, either forcing you to do something or making it illegal to do something else. So if laws are here, policies are a little bit higher concept. They're more of ideas. And so policy is kind of a set of principles that you use to make actual laws and make decisions. For instance, if you think if your policy is that every American needs health care, well then your decisions might be very, very different than someone who does not hold that policy. So when we talk about policy, we're talking about general ideas about how power should be used. And so our government, it's the institutions like the police, like the presidency, the processes by which a nation state, in this case the United States of America, is going to be ruled and its laws created. So when we're talking about government, folks, we're really talking about the idea of exercising power. So you've heard a lot probably about the US Constitution, and it's the greatest document in America that no one has read. So we're actually going to, a little bit later in the class, read the Constitution so that we can understand what's in it. But it's important to understand what it is. And so a Constitution, and America is not the only country that has one, a lot of countries have them, it's basically the fundamental law. It is the law that every other law has to be based on. And the reason you have a Constitution is actually not to give power, but to limit power. If you're an absolute monarch and you're a king, you don't need a constitution to tell you what you can and can't do. You can just do things. And so the point of a constitution is to set a series of laws, which means that the government's power is limited. This does not necessarily mean democracy. The Magna Carta in England is a great example of a time in which a monarch actually signed a constitution limiting the power of that monarch. Now, no one voted on anything, but the King of England was no longer as powerful as they previously had been. And so America, a constitutional democracy, has an electorate. We have voting citizens who, in theory, can hold our elected representatives accountable to this ultimate document. And so essentially, in American life, in American law, if it goes against the Constitution, it's an unjust law and it's unconstitutional and therefore has no effect. So when we talk about America, the United States is really not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. We have a constitution that limits the power that our government has, and we're a republic. And what a republic is a government that carries out the will of the people through representation. So you don't actually go and vote on the laws that are passed. You elect people to do that for you. And so the government is we the people, that's the republic, but we vote for representatives to exercise that power for us. So the United States is not a pure democracy. We don't go to the polls all the time, vote on everything. You don't get together and meet, as 2 million Chicagoans to decide what to do. We are democratic. We are ruled by the people, but we don't participate in those decisions. We give power to our representatives, but it is democratic because we vote for them. And in theory, we can vote against them, and some laws, they're called referendums, actually can only pass if the people vote for them. And so, again, America is democratic, and we're a democracy, but we're not a pure democracy. And so in America, kind of the democracy, the rule of the people we practice, there's kind of 3 ways of thinking about it. One is participatory. And this says that American democracy only works when individual people are directly involved in the government. That can mean anything from, organizing a protest to, cleaning up the park on your weekend. It emphasizes the idea that the individual citizen has to be involved in order for the system to work. There's another theory called pluralist democracy that says that really our democracy is just competing interest groups that play tug of war and ultimately decide amongst themselves. So pluralists would point at things like, business owners or entrepreneurs as a group. They could look at religious Americans as a group, environmentalists as a group. And so that idea says a lot of diverse groups come together, compromise, and create something for the whole country. The last kind is elite democracy, where we look at our society and we say that actually very few people have a lot of the power. And so if you're someone who believes that kind of the powerful run everything and the rich run everything, that would be kind of the idea of elite democracy, that there are kind of a privileged group of people that really make the decisions. So when we talk about political science, what we're really talking about is just a very simple question. How should power be used, and how should these societies be set up? And this idea is kind of as old as society. From the tribal eras back in the day to now, these are still the questions. And so this question about how should we be ruled or how should we use power, it really starts with the question of human nature. What are people like? Are we naturally good? Are we naturally evil? And so the way that you think about humans, whether we can be trusted, whether we're good or evil, determines a lot about how you think power should be used. Can anyone be trusted with power? Ooh. Should people be free? Do people need to be controlled so they don't kill each other? Can the people be trusted to make good decisions for themselves? And so we really kind of talk about this debate in terms of liberty versus order. How free should you be versus, how much do you really need to be controlled? And so, kind of kick off our year, we're just going to take a quick tour of kind of philosophies, ideas about power and government that have had a huge influence on American politics and government. So the first thing that we got to talk about is just the basic idea of the social contract, right? And so the social contract, we talked about this a lot last year, is the basis for really all governments. It's this unwritten agreement in society where we give up our kind of complete control in exchange for some sort of benefit or protection, or, because we are afraid, either or. And so when we're talking about social contract, we're talking about this idea that people have to go along with governments. So one of the earliest ideas about social contract comes from a guy called Thomas Hobbes, who wrote a book called Leviathan. Ooh. And Leviathan is kind of, this big, powerful, mythical creature. And what Thomas Hobbes said about human nature is that human beings really aren't to be trusted, that we're kind of savage in nature, that we're born, we're all equal, there's no laws, and so there's violence and competition. And so his idea was like life without government, without social contract, was pretty terrible. Nasty, brutish, and short was his kind of quote for that. And so the idea of government, according to Hobbes, is very simple. Ordinary people give up their rights to a very powerful king or government that then protects and secures your rights. However, his big idea about that was that really, once you give up your rights, you don't get them back. That you don't have a right to overthrow this government. You cannot fight against the king. Loyalty to the monarchy is the most important thing. And the idea of this was that there's no guarantees, because remember, human beings are bad, that if you overthrew the monarch, that anything would be better. And so the more important thing than, maybe having an unpopular ruler or something was to have that strong government to provide stability and safety. And so Thomas Hobbes doesn't really care about the idea of freedom. Thomas Hobbes cares about the idea of safety and stability in a society. So years later, John Locke comes on the scene, and John Locke has a lot of influence on Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and what he comes up with is this idea that, maybe human beings are bad, but human beings have natural rights. And so he has this idea that everyone is born with life, liberty, and property, that you have the right to your life, you have the right to be free and choose things with your life, and that you are born and you are entitled to the fruit of your labors, of whatever you produce you should keep. And so John Locke's idea was that, the social contracts exist solely for the purpose of protecting these three natural rights given to us at birth. And so because of that, the social contract is a two-way street. If a government doesn't protect your rights, then they've broken the contract, and you can overthrow that government. The United States, when it broke away from Great Britain, that is the exact argument that they used, that Britain had violated the social contract to protect the colony's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And so John Locke, huge influence, natural rights. Then we get to one of my favorite guys, Baron Charles de Montesquieu, kind of fun name to say. And his idea was real simple. If you want to protect people's rights, their natural rights, then all you have to do is separate the three powers of government. Every government has the power to create law, to enforce law, and to judge law or judge you guilty by the law. And so his idea was if you separate those three, then that provides kind of checks and balances, or at least some sort of kind of, potential to protect your rights. Because if we think about this, if I was the absolute ruler of the world, I could make a rule that says everybody with brown eyes in this class gets an F. I could just make that rule. Nobody could stop me. As the executive, I would carry out that law, giving everybody with brown eyes an F. And you guys would be like, that's not fair, Mr. Mueller. And I would say, okay, fine. I'm the judge. I'm going to judge the rule is fair, even though you guys don't think that way. And so Montesquieu's idea was if you split these three jobs up, then the legislative branch, or the legislative power, would have to rely on somebody different to actually carry out the law, and then somebody different who could be more fair would judge the law. And so if you know about the three branches of government, checks and balances, we stole that from Charles de Montesquieu. And so then there's two other guys I want to throw out there because their ideas have been very influential, not on the structures of American government, but on the way that we think about power. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that the only freedom was pure democracy. In his book, The Social Contract, it's a very interesting book. His opening line is very famous. He says, "Man was born free, but everywhere is in chains." And that quote means very, very simply that we're born free, we're born good, and that is actually our participation in society that corrupts us, takes away our natural rights. And so Montesquieu's idea is that actually the social contract isn't real. That the elites, the powerful, the monarchs, the aristocrats, all that stuff, that they made up this idea of social contract so that the common person would be more accepting and more easily controlled. And so Montesquieu says, why do you let people, even if they are your representatives, take away your freedom and rule you, right? And so kind of his thought was very, very important when we talk about this idea of who does the government serve and who should it serve. Because Rousseau's idea was that essentially these types of governments that are being set up, republics, social contracts, that they only benefited elites, and in fact, they were really just an illusion, that you felt free so you could be more easily controlled. And so for Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the only thing that could work would be direct democracy, all the people ruling, no matter how impractical that may seem, right? Last big guy I want to talk about is just Karl Marx. He's really influential in terms of kind of modern political philosophy. And he introduces into our world this idea of materialism, that really freedom doesn't matter. It's not a thing. That the only thing that matters are economic forces and your material life circumstances. And so Karl Marx said that really all politics is class struggle. That politics, fights over power, are between the wealthy, the bourgeoisie, and the working class, the proletariat. And so his idea about the world is just philosophy. But then he came up with a political idea called socialism, and then eventually kind of in communism, where in order to ensure that material life circumstances were equal, the state would control all resources, industry, business, and everything else. And so Karl Marx is not concerned with freedom. He doesn't care if you're free. He doesn't care if you can choose things, because people who are socialists and communists, they believe that material life circumstances are simply more important than abstract ideas about freedom or social contract. And Marx also would agree very heavily with Jean-Jacques Rousseau, where he would say that all of your advertisements, even my U.S. history class, that it was all just kind of ideology, this kind of movie that we show you to keep you under control. And so very, very influential on modern day politics have been the ideas of Karl Marx. So if you're interested in kind of, looking at the Marxist Rousseau ideas a little bit more, in 1988, a movie was made called They Live, in which the main character with a special pair of sunglasses was able to see past what was shown and to see the reality behind it. And so when looking at Times Square, this is what he saw: obey, consume, work, reproduce, buy. And so kind of this movie is very much influenced by Rousseau and Marx's ideas that as we buy into the social contract of I'm going to work so I can have my dream vacation and I'm free to choose my job, that perhaps it is really not as real as we think that it is. And so in America, in the world, we fight a lot over the idea of the social contract. Is it real? What should it be? Is it worth it? And this shows up a lot, especially in films. all the superhero movies in one way or another kind of deal with that idea of social contract, right? When the Avengers destroy everything, have they broken the social contract to keep the world safe? In The Dark Knight Rises, when the leaders of Gotham lie to everyone in order to, keep the peace in the city. Post-apocalyptic stuff like The Hunger Games explores this. And so in a lot of ways, we as a people, as a society, we're constantly trying to deal with, like, what is the proper role of government and how should it relate to me, the citizen? And so if we look at America, it's very simple. The social contract of our country is written out in the United States Constitution. You would think that writing it, in 1787, all those years ago, we would have settled it. But here we are in the year 2020, and we are still arguing what is the social contract that is laid out in the U.S. Constitution. So hopefully this was a little bit informative. Please make sure that you finish the textbook reading and post all your questions. Have a great rest of your day.